let's talk about a little bit of a rumbling that's gone around our college football ecosystem here, really ever since the confetti dropped in Los Angeles. And Nick, Brake, and I were there. It was a scene and a half. Like, it was pandemonium on that field as Georgia celebrated their second national title in 2 years. And a lot of people started thinking, man, is anybody going to beat Georgia? They were already thinking that going into 2023. Can anybody beat Georgia? Now, I want to make this very clear. This is not a prediction segment. Like, I'm not predicting Georgia's to do anything in this very segment. We'll definitely predict them as we get further and further into this fall, or closer to the fall, rather. But we had a segment on the On3 Roundtable, which is a separate YouTube channel where we talk to some of the best in the industry at their respective markets. And we had Rusty Mansell on, who is co-owner of Dogs HQ, or Georgia On3 site. And I just asked him, man, I was like, listen, Georgia, their roster is so stacked. Yes, you lose Stetson Bennett, but you bring in Carson Beck. You bring back 70% of the production on defense that was really good last year. Like, how do you beat Georgia, Rusty? And he kind of laid out this formula for me. He's like, when you watched Ohio State last year, it really felt like they had them on the ropes. I mean, Kirby Smart, after that game, if you're reading between the lines there, said that Georgia played poorly enough to lose that game in the semifinal. And a big part of what Ohio State did was winning one-on-ones. And Rusty essentially just laid it out. He's like, if you want to beat Georgia, you got to make it a game where you win those one-on-one battles on the outside. Your big dog wide receiver better play like that big dog wide receiver and go win. And so if that's the formula, there's a little more than what meets the eye, but I think what Rusty said is on the money. If you want to beat Georgia, you got to win outside. You got to win over the top. Because if you play in the trenches with Georgia, I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying I haven't seen it done consistently and effectively to the level at which it gives me a ton of confidence for anybody wanting to play in the trenches against Georgia. So if you are going to win one-on-one, how do you make that happen? One, you got to have some kind of success in the run game. Now, you don't live in the trenches. You don't make it a game where you play 3 yards in a cloud of dust against Georgia, because that's just beating your head against a wall, and eventually Georgia's going to figure that out. But you do it enough to where you earn the right to be one-on-one on the outside, meaning those safeties, they can't just sit back and play over the top and be safety help for the deep pass if you're able to get something on the ground, if you're able to create something with the power game or inside zone game, whatever it is, just enough to keep them honest. Just enough to keep them honest. That's one piece of this. The other way to do it is you scheme it up. Now, Tennessee did this, and Georgia dared them to do it, quite frankly. I mean, Georgia just played man coverage and said, we like our guys better than your guys. But that's the other thing you can do. In modern college football, without getting too in the weeds, the hashes are set up to where you can line somebody way the heck out near the sideline, and just by nature of what humans are capable of doing, you can't cover all 53.3 yards of width. So you have one guy all the way out there with not as much space to work with when it comes to the sideline, but he's got the rest of the field to try and win. So you got to win one-on-one. Going back to that winning one-on-one, you can kind of scheme it up to a degree. And you got to make your shot when it's open. If you win your one-on-one, you got to make sure you capitalize on it. But that's another way that you can try and get this done against Georgia. So who could it be? That's really the whole question we got to ask here. Who could it be if you're going to try and beat the Georgia Bulldogs? We got to look at the regular season schedule. We'll talk more about, some playoff possibilities. I got one playoff possibility that I think is interesting, but we just got to look at the regular season schedule here. And let's start with week 3. It's South Carolina, and they go to Athens, which isn't ideal, but they go to South Carolina comes to Athens, and that's one team that I think is very fascinating because of what we just talked about. Having an alpha dog wide receiver, Juice Wells. He was that guy at the end of the year, man. Him and Spencer Rattler were synced up, and he was putting up road to glory numbers. Against Tennessee, I think he had close to 200 yards receiving. He had 2 touchdowns against Clemson. They were just playing upset like it was their job with South Carolina. Now, roster-wise, I don't think South Carolina matches up well with Georgia. It's not saying much. Not many places do across the country. But there's a couple things to look into now. Does Juice Wells just play to his potential and have a day like he had against Tennessee and win one-on-one, and maybe he's just your equalizer. Maybe he's your edge for you that day. Also, it's the first SEC game. This is the first game of real competition that Georgia's going to see. Now, I don't love that for South Carolina because typically Georgia, especially early in the year, they're not a team that you're really going to see fall asleep at the wheel. I'm pretty sure Kirby Smart has just eliminated complacency, not just within his building in Athens, but just like the entire city of Athens. I just think he just radiates intentionality and we're going to be detail-oriented and we're not going to be complacent. Like, that's one thing. The other thing that concerns me a little bit about South Carolina in this game is just what I said to preface this segment. You got to run the ball well enough to where you keep those safeties honest. Now, South Carolina, last year when they lost this game, their leading rusher had 33 yards. Doesn't inspire a ton of confidence if you're playing Georgia. You can't be one-dimensional against Georgia. Other side of this is it would require Spencer Rattler to play mistake-free football. I don't know if he's able to do that against a defense like Georgia. So, not predicting this, but if you were to look at a matchup early in the year where you say, okay, if it is about one-on-ones and it is about having that alpha dog wide receiver, Juice Wells has shown he can be that guy for you if you're South Carolina. So keep an eye on that one. South Carolina, I think, is one team, if you were looking for potential bugaboos for Georgia, I think that's the one. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're locked in right here. We talk ball every single day. Glad to have you a part of it. We'll move right along here. Another team we got to look at here, Kentucky. Kentucky goes to Athens. Again, not your favorite situation. October 7th, we're sticking with the same theme here. If it is about wide receiver play, if that is the one edge that you think you can maybe have over Georgia, Kentucky got a three-headed monster at wide receiver. Barry and Brown, everything freshman last year. Dane Key, another dog freshman for them. Some people in Kentucky believe that Dane Key was actually the best receiver for Kentucky last year. Tavian Robinson, dynamic in the slot. Like, they got some pieces now, and not just one piece, which is crucial, to where if Georgia wants to play Kentucky straight up, you don't need just one alpha wide receiver to get open. You got three options. You got three guys that if they get open, you can get them the football, and maybe good things can happen for you. The other side of this, and this is maybe a little bit more of a take that I'm in the minority on, but Will Levis, probably one of the most talented arms in college football last year. But even so, man, you know what he didn't do well was take care of the football. Last 2 years for Will Levis, double-digit interceptions. Now enter into the fray via the transfer portal, Devin Leary from NC State. Devin Leary has never thrown double-digit interceptions in a season ever in college. So Devin Leary, still a very capable, talented quarterback. If he takes care of the football, and maybe one of these guys, or maybe it's by committee between these three receivers, Robinson, Brown, and Key, if one of them has a great day, that could be the edge for Kentucky. That could be the way that maybe you catch Georgia sleeping October 7th. After they play Auburn, they go to Jordan-Hare. Maybe, just maybe for Kentucky, that's your edge in that ballgame. Last thing I'll say about Kentucky, remember last year, it felt like Georgia just rolled through the regular season. Well, actually, Kentucky gave them a pretty good ballgame. It was ugly. It was at Kentucky. I think it was rainy. Final score was 16-6. As much as you want to say about Kentucky last year and what they didn't do relative to expectations going into the year, only lost to Georgia by 10 points. We're not into moral victories, but I think that's one thing to watch for. Now, the problem is when you play Georgia, I just think this offense is going to continue to be dynamic. Like, I think Mike Bobo and Carson Beck, I don't think they'll miss a beat from where Bennett and Monken left off. So you got to score with Georgia. Unfortunately, I don't think you'll hold them to 16 points this coming season. But there is a way, there is a path, I believe, for Kentucky to potentially get it done. So keep an eye on Kentucky. Now, the last one on the regular season is one that all of the good folks in Athens have circled, and a lot of people in the Volunteers, they have it circled as well. Because the second to last week of the season, the Dogs go to Neyland Stadium. The place will be rocking, especially if Tennessee is able to trend the way that a lot of people believe they could trend up to that point. It could be a game that decides that side of the SEC. Last year, Jalen Hyatt and Hendon Hooker had a couple of shots in this game that they almost connected on, but almost just means they didn't connect on them. And a lot of Tennessee fans will tell you, if they connect on just one of those, I think it was like 2 or 3 they took deep to Jalen Hyatt, they didn't hit on. If they connect on one of those, it might change the ball game, and it might put Georgia a little bit on their heels early. Now, of course, it was in Athens. Place was rocking. They go to Neyland this year. And Neyland, not an easy place to play. So for Georgia, the same thing is true of what happened last year has to happen this year. You got to win one-on-one on the outside. And Tennessee, even though you lose Jalen Hyde, even though you lose Cedric Tillman, I'm still very high on their receiving core. Brew McCoy is going to be physical with you. Squirrel White, 23 miles per hour on the catapult. Translation, dude is fast, speeding in a school zone. Dante Thornton, transfer from Oregon, I think is going to just have an elite season for Tennessee. I would not be surprised at all if Dante Thornton has the best season of the entire Tennessee wide receiving core. I'll just say it right now. He may lead the team in receiving. Unique blend of speed and size, so he's tough to match up with. Also for Georgia now, I'm not down on any of their secondary, but I will say Keely Ringo did a really good job one-on-one last year in this game. Who is it this year? Is it Malachi Starks? Probably. But I'm just saying, keep an eye on that for Georgia and for Tennessee. The one-on-one battle, Tennessee's going to spread you out. They're going to have a chance to take some of those shots. It's going to require Georgia to be disciplined, and that's Georgia's middle name. But still, keep an eye on that one. Of all these games, I like this one the best because it's at Neyland. It's not going to Athens. Now, if you're a Georgia fan, maybe you're an Ole Miss fan. If you're watching this program, you're saying, well, they still got to play Ole Miss. JD, you just forget about Coach Kiffin. Didn't forget about Coach Kiffin, but the way that they play, I think it would require a superhuman effort in the trenches by Ole Miss. Like last year, they ran the ball 60% of the time. I love Quinshawn Judkins. Heck, I'm even higher on Jackson Dart than the average Bear is. But even with that being said, I don't love Ole Miss's chances having to play in the box and be in a wrestling match against Georgia, just big on big. I don't like anyone big on big against Georgia. You got to win on the outside if you want to beat Georgia. So for that reason, Ole Miss did not make this list. One more team we got to talk about here, because you assume at this point in the year, if we're trusting Vegas, that Georgia finds himself back in the college football playoff. For the sake of this conversation, we're going to make that assumption. Who could beat Georgia? Well, who had Georgia on the ropes last year in the game of the year? None other than the Ohio State Buckeyes. And if Marvin Harrison Jr. stays in that game, there's a lot of folks in Columbus that believe Ohio State may have played for and then won a national title. Marvin Harrison Jr. and company, they think there's unfinished business. And if you were to go down to the football offices at Ohio State, you would go to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center and say, hey, you make the college football playoff, who do you want to play? Pick any team. I think Ohio State would, not because of a matchup standpoint, but because of a pride and we got to get what we believe is ours back and we want to finish the deal, I believe they would say, you know what, we probably wouldn't want to play until the Natty, but we want to play Georgia. We want to have a chance to go back at the best in the country and try and exploit that matchup that we had. Because Marvin Harrison Jr. was cooking like Walter White in that game before he got injured and went out of the game. I mean, he was the difference maker, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is a one of one, so I don't want to just paint that to be the formula to beat Georgia completely, because Marvin Harrison Jr., there's nobody else like him in the country. But you hear what I'm saying here. Marvin Harrison Jr., if he's on his game, if he's able to win one-on-one and just have his kind of game that he wants to have against Georgia, that could be the difference maker. That was the difference maker last year. Obviously, he goes out of the game, and one thing led to another, and Georgia came storming back. But, still, you hear what I'm saying. Marvin Harrison Jr. could be that kryptonite for the defense. Now, here's my concern. Who'd you have throwing the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. last year? C.J. Stroud, second overall pick in the NFL draft. So a lot would have to fall on, you would imagine, Kyle McCord's shoulders, or Devin Brown's shoulders, I guess, whoever ends up starting there. You also got to get past Michigan. But I'm just saying, if there's one person that I believe Georgia wouldn't want to play, I think it's Marvin Harrison Jr. So South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee in the regular season, I think, have the best shot to try and dethrone Georgia. Ohio State in the playoff, because of having Marvin Harrison Jr., you got to feel a little bit confident in your chances to get that done. So who's going to beat Georgia? I don't know, but I think those teams have the best chances. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count.
Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.